awesome. That's going to grow up just like you. Tall and strong. All right. Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming out. I appreciate it. It looks like the weather is going to cooperate here with any luck. So I'll start out with introducing myself. I'm Blair Crane. I'm the Department of Public Works Director here, as well as the town's tree warden. For those of you that aren't familiar with what a tree warden does, every town in the Commonwealth is supposed to have a tree warden. And a tree warden really is the person who's responsible for all the public trees in the town. So the trees that are here in the cemetery or in our parks along the sides of the road, the trees that are at Town Hill, are all my responsibility. And there are laws that protect those trees, which the law itself dates back to the beginning of the 1900s, when a tree warden essentially was the protector of the town tree. It used to be the place where everybody met long before we had the internet and Google and phones, and so everybody would meet at the tree in the center of town, and there had to be somebody who was responsible to protect that tree, and hence we had tree wardens. So it's an old position. So I am the tree warden here. As you can see, we have a lot of beautiful trees, and last year I decided that every year we should have a tree planting and try to put some of the trees back and give back some trees here in town. As you see, every year we have a lot of things that hurt our trees, ash borer and different bugs and beetles and tree diseases that we deal with. So it's good to bring back a new generation of trees. So here we are today to demonstrate planting a new tree. This is a sugar maple, much like the one that's behind us here. If you have maple syrup in the morning, which a lot of people enjoy on pancakes and waffles, this is the type of tree that sap comes from. You'll see a lot of times in pictures, the old farmers used to drill a small little hole in a sugar maple tree and hang a bucket on the side of it, and it would look like water almost, really like sugary water. And so they would take that and boil that down and hence make maple syrup. It takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup. So you have to tap a lot of trees, and it's a long process. But so this is that type of tree. We're going to go ahead and we're going to start to finish planting here. We dug the hole a little bit this morning. We weren't sure what kind of soil we were going to get into, so we did that already. When planting a tree like this, you want to take a look and see the collar of the tree, which you can see right here, is where the roots come up, and then you can see there's a little bit of like a thick neck almost on the tree itself. And you want to have that about 1 inch above whatever the finished grade of your tree is going to be. So we've measured that out already, and that's about where we are. Excuse me, that's about where we are now. We've taken and fluffed a lot of the soil underneath, so that these roots that you can see here are undamaged, and you want them to be able to breathe a little bit and to be able to soak up the nutrients in the soil. So we're going to go ahead and put some topsoil back in the pile.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
About when you get it in a store, is it in a burlap bag?
A lot of times stores do it a little bit differently. This particular one came in a burlap bag because the burlap will actually hold some of the water as they're watering it. This tree is approximately 5 years old, so it's been sitting in a nursery for a long time. So the nursery will water it every few days, and the burlap essentially just keeps everything moist.
So when we get it home, we should definitely...
Yeah, you definitely want to do away with the burlap, because essentially the burlap will keep the root ball. A tree will only grow as far as it can grow, almost like a fish in a tank. A fish in a tank will only grow as much as it can. So a tree like this, now that it doesn't have the burlap on it anymore, is free to migrate out. Similar to the tree behind you, you can see that the hole here is about 30 inches around, which essentially is about the same size as the canopy itself. So when you look at a tree, any tree around, that's about the size of the root ball of the tree. The tree behind you can see is pretty wide. I would say about 15 feet, 20 feet. You can expect that root ball of that tree to be about the same size in the ground. So here we're just putting in, you don't want to compact the soil when you plant your seedling or any tree. You want to put good nutrients around, fluff it in there a little bit. It may settle in the coming months, but that's all right. You just don't want to compact it in. You want water and the nutrients to be able to get to the root ball. Now one thing that you see an awful lot of landscapers like to do what we call build volcanoes around their trees, where they'll build big humps here to try to essentially have a place for water to gather around the tree. The problem with that is that trees don't normally grow deep, especially in New England because the soil is so hard. They will grow out. So when you volcano mulch around the outside of it, you're really keeping water from being able to get to the tree itself. So it looks pretty, it's very aesthetic, but at the same time doesn't really help the tree all that much. So you want to try to keep the ground as level as you can around it. And then as we're doing here, the grass, it's okay to have the grass right up tight to it.
So you're not adding anything other than, it's just topsoil and
Yes, yep.
the
fertilizer.
or no.
We put a little bit of compost in it just to give it a little bit of, kind of give it a jump.
Yeah.
As with anything, this tree is going to have a little bit of a shock because it's been in a burlap bag for the last 5 years, and now it's sitting here in a park. So we want to try to mimic what it's going to continue to live in. So some of the original topsoil that we took out of the hole to begin with, we put back in the hole. We want it to start to, and some trees can take up to a year to get acclimated to where they're going to spend the rest of their lives. So it's good to start that process, and we'll come out here every couple of days for the next few months to check on it, make sure that it's getting plenty of soil.
So, because the soil will start to sink.
The soil, you're right. It will settle a little bit. Yep, we'll add a little bit. You can see here we could put a tiny little bit of just flat mulch around it to try, especially in the beginning, to try to keep the soil in the root system, keep water in the root system. But for the most part, and a lot of things can happen. It's all of a sudden now it's out in the open, depending on which way the wind blows here. Predominantly, could push on the tree a little bit. You can see that a lot. Sometimes if it's shaded from where the sun is, it will lean and try to grow in that area. A lot of times that's how you see normal trees moving in one direction or another, or a lot of times there are branches on one side of a tree and not on the other. So you can learn a lot about a tree. You can, from where it's growing, what it's doing. That particular sugar maple right there looks all nice and even all the way around because it is all by itself. It doesn't have to fight for the sun from any other trees. It's getting plenty of moisture, so it's a very healthy tree. We do keep it pruned back, and hopefully now it'll have one just like it right next to it. So we will continue to monitor this and go forth as one of Norfolk's nice sugar maples. We do have a few here in town that are pretty sweet, so we'll,
Very punny.
yes, a little pun. So one thing that I also wanted to, if there aren't, anybody have any questions about planting of a tree? Sure, Don.
So it came in the burlap bag.
It did.
You just remove the bag and
Yeah,
leave,
so actually
leave the clump?
So yeah,
Or
so
you
this
shake it
particular
out?
one came with a burlap bag, and then it actually had a wire net around the outside of it to sort of hold it together. So what we do is once you take the burlap bag off, a lot of times, and this is a great case, a lot of times most of the dirt will just fall away from it anyway. Being a sugar maple, different types of trees have different root systems in them, but it's okay to fluff up a little bit, and you want the roots, you don't want to damage the roots, but it's okay to kind of pry the hard clumps of dirt out. You want the roots to be able to naturally flow away from the trunk of the tree. So
if they're tangled among each other, you should...
yeah, you can like you would your hair. You don't want to pull on your hair, you just want to kind of untangle it. And so that's what we did here. We untangled them all, and then we just gently put the dirt back in, the soil back in. Where the soil is pretty soft here, we're going to have to check it on Monday to make sure that we get some rain tomorrow night. To make sure that it's still true and sitting straight up and down. And for the first week or so, we're going to have to really keep an eye on it here. But I suspect.
Yeah, I was going to.
Yes.
Would you stake it?
Not if I don't have to, and the only reason that I don't like to stake it is because at some point I got to hook onto the tree itself, and the tree, you can actually strangle a tree. So most of the nutrients in a tree go up just underneath the bark, or up the outside. The heartwood of a tree is right in the center of the tree, and most of the heartwood, especially on a larger tree, is really dead wood. So when you stake a tree and you have to hook onto that tree, it knows, and that's why it tries to grow around it. Same with cutting a branch off. You'll see that over the years it will envelop that to try to heal itself wherever you've made a nick in it. So I try not to hook them up to anything if I don't have to.
Can you stake it with just like a wraparound collar and not?
You could, yeah. I would, if you were going to do anything like that, maybe a cloth,
right?
Something that kind of disperses
the
right.
It, but
instead of like a wire, but
just like really
yeah, I would
soft
like
supports.
wrap a cloth around it, something soft, and try to not to leave it on there longer than you have to. That tree does understand that there's something there that it doesn't like, that it's not used to, and it will try to grow around that. A lot of times when you take down 100-year-old trees, you'll find pitchforks in them where the farmer put the pitchfork up against the tree. I've seen barbed wire, staples. I've seen horseshoes were a big one back in the day in the 1800s. Sawmills have it all the time where they're putting pine trees and whatnot, and the tree literally will envelop the entire horseshoe. Or I've seen them grow around bicycles, all kinds of stuff. So the tree knows it's there and will try to just grow around it. It knows it can't move it. So
is the same true for like the little redbud saplings?
Yep. So a redbud knows it'll get used to its surroundings.
Yeah.
And like I said, in the worst time of that tree is really when it gets set wherever it's going to spend the rest of its life. It has to get used to the environment, how much sun it's going to get, the conditions, if it's cold, warm, how much moisture it's going to get. So the sooner you can get it planted to where you want it to grow up, the better.
So when we plant our little twig, we won't put a stake.
Right, and you'll be surprised. It'll take a little bit for it to get used to where it is, but it's once it starts to show some signs of life, a little leaf or whatever, it'll take off pretty quick. They said this started out like your little twig 5 years ago.
Wow, so 5 years.
So in 5 years, that's about 5 years worth of growth.
For the redbud too, it would.
Redbud maybe a little bit slower because the redbud is going to reach maturity at about 15 feet.
And this is how tall?
So this is, I would say it's about 11 feet. The one behind it, I would say you're over 20 already.
This one is
11
feet.
Yep, this
And
is
the
11.
redbud's going to get to
15 to 20 for a mature redbud.
That's really.
Yeah, so they're not massive trees. I would say a medium size, but that
Will
one
it be
there.
about that size?
Yeah, I would say at full maturity. I would say, but you're probably looking at about 25 years to reach that height and that size.
Can you talk a little bit about how to start planting that sapling, whether or not to start it in a pot or to put it right in the ground, and what type of soil to use for that?
So you could use a planting soil, like I said, in its initial stages, in the first year of its development, it's going to try to get acclimated to wherever it is it's going to be. So I would try to put it in the ground if you can. If you'd like to put it in a pot, you can certainly do that, because the other issue is going to be that as it starts to figure out where it lives, it's going to start to put out its root system, and you don't want to disturb that when you go to put it in the ground from a pot, because then it's going to have to get used to it all over again. So if you can put it in the ground, I would recommend doing that. It's not to say that you have to, but I would say definitely try to put it there. It can get used to where it is, the soils, the temperature, the sun, and has a much better chance of being a successful planting.
And what about the types of soil? Just use the topsoil that you have, or could
yeah,
you
you
add
could-
compost to that?
That's compost and topsoil together. You could add regular planting soil is fine. It's heavy in nitrogen and nutrients, so you could certainly do that. We have topsoil at the transfer station. If you wanted to get some of that soil, that's fine. But anything that you would get at a hardware store is fine. Any type of planting soil to start with. It's going to outgrow it fairly quickly, but certainly acceptable.
And how about protecting it from the deer that come around the neighborhoods? Because it's just one little stick.
Right. Early on, there isn't going to be much for them to eat, so they're opportunistic feeders. So they aren't going to shy away from something that's better than eating a piece of wood. So early on, I wouldn't see that being an issue. As it grows up, you may have an issue, but I'm not sure at that point you'll be able to do a whole lot about it. Early on, I would be very shocked if a deer ate a seedling. Not to say that doesn't happen, but I would be surprised. Anybody else?
We have a question about flowers. Will the sugar maple and or a redbud have any flowers on them? And
Yeah, so the
what
red
color would they be?
the red bud is pink.
What? Pink.
There's a smile.
Our tree's gonna have pink flowers on it.
Like her
Yep.
coat?
What's that?
Like her
Magenta?
coat? Or
Yeah, actually even a little deeper pink than that. So if you drive down, there are a few red buds that are easily seen. If you drive down Pond Street, past Pond Street Rec, and you go past where Marshall Street comes out on the left-hand side, there are some flowered red buds there today.
Should we drive by them in
There's 3 or 4 of them in a row, and they are bright pink. They're hard to miss.
Okay, you can help me find those. Will you help
So
me
you
find
will
those?
definitely have some flowers. May take a year or two for them to come out, but they will definitely be bright pink. You can't miss them.
Thank you.
And how much would that sapling that we got yesterday, it's maybe, I don't know, 14 inches or so tall, how much would you expect that to grow in the first season?
Depending on its environment, obviously nutrients, sun, water, all of that plays a part in it. It could grow, you could get a foot out of it the first year, depending on how it goes, and it will exponentially grow from there. So the slowest growth is going to be in the beginning. As it starts to leaf out, and if it gets plenty of nutrients, it will exponentially begin to grow more and more if it's in a favorable spot. Almost like any house plant, if it gets great attention and is well watered and gets great nutrients, it'll take right off. If it's not, that's its way of telling you that it's not happy. So,
And if we have, say, a really dry spell during the summer and it's pounding down sun, how often and how much should I water my little red bud?
I usually go out and literally just stick about 6 inches away and stick my finger in the soil.
Right.
And you can see here, so just by doing that, I can see that the soil is moist because it's
Yes.
sticking to my finger. If that soil is really, really dry, you'll be able to do that and you'll have nothing on your finger whatsoever.
Right.
And then I would go out, I've done it in the past, a little tree like that, you could just keep the soil moist and it'll be fine the first year.
Okay.
On a tree like this, I would do this if we hadn't had any rain in a couple of weeks. I would come out here and you could even put 5 gallons of water into this and just try to soak the soil. A lot of it will dissipate down into the soil, but I know that in particular, in this particular tree, about 2 feet down, there's really, really hard clay. So I know that any water that I put on here is going to go out where the roots are, because there's a clay bottom on the side. There's nowhere for the water to go but out. But so that'll depend when you dig the hole for your seedling.
Yeah.
Take a look at and kind of remember what that soil looks like.
And it's gonna, for the seedling, you know, the roots are like that long, maybe. The hole is gonna be just
Yeah, it
that
doesn't have to be.
size.
I would give yourself a 12-inch hole, just to loosen the soil a
And
little
it's
bit
gonna
so
be
that it
quite
has.
shallow, right? I mean,
Yeah, you want to
Yes.
again look at you
Yeah,
should be able to see on your seedling
Right.
where that collar is, and same rules apply. And the easier the easier of a time it has to put the roots out. So you want that fluffy kind of easygoing soil. That means the tree is spending less energy to try to put the roots out.
would it make sense before putting the little seedling in to go out and
Oh,
loosen
absolutely.
up, you
Yep.
know, because it's kind of the place I've got is it's not like this. It's not just the perfect ready to go. So it would make sense to go out and
Sure.
do some chopping and loosening the
Absolutely. The
general
looser the soil, obviously you want it enough so that it'll hold it up. A little seedling isn't going to have the issue of trying to fall over. But at the same time, the less energy it has to put to try to get roots out. The roots will essentially, if I was to have a granite curb here, let's say, the tree will grow out to the edge of the granite curb and do one of two things. It'll realize at that point that there's something there. Now it knows that either to put roots out going in a different direction or to go down and try to get underneath it. And I've seen both happen. I've seen roots to a tree be on the other side of the road.
Yeah.
it will go wherever it's easiest for it to do it, if it can still get the nutrients that it needs. So at the end of the day, a tree will tell you whether or not it's, if you know how to read the signs, it'll tell you when it's happy
I'm afraid my tree will
and when
tell
it
me
isn't.
it's not liking its place, and it'll be too late to do anything.
No problem. Take care. Anybody else? All right. So I have just, if anyone's interested, I have what we call a resistograph over here that I use to for anyone that's ever had an X-ray. For all intents and purposes, it's a tree machine that tells me what the inside of a tree looks like without having to chop it down. And we can take a walk. Do you want to come over here, Donna? And we can take a walk over here and take a look at it. So this is a resistograph. And just like anybody that's ever had a shot at the doctor, this machine has a tiny, tiny little needle in it. And I put it up against the tree itself, and it drills a tiny little hole in it, just like getting a shot in your arm. And it tells me what the inside of the tree looks like. And by doing that, there's a computer printout that I can look at, and it can tell me exactly what the inside looks like and whether or not it's healthy or whether or not it's rotten on the inside. So in this particular tree, you can see that the outside, where all the nutrients are, was very healthy, and then when it got to the center of the tree, it was rotten on the inside and wasn't very happy, and then when it got to the other side of the tree, it was happy again and it was growing well. So without having to do any major work to a tree, I can take a look at any tree, and after just a couple of minutes take a look at it and say, yes, it's there's a risk that it could fall down tomorrow, or it's perfectly healthy and it's not going to fall down tomorrow. So
can you tell the tree's age by that aristograph?
Depends on the tree. So the resistograph actually shows me the size of the tree and actually at real scale, in half-inch increments, exactly what the tree looks like.
So that's that is the diameter of the trunk.
Correct.
On that page.
Yep, absolutely. So I can tell exactly where, and I can take a couple of different measurements, so I can see whether or not it's an issue, maybe just where I took the sample, or if I take it in 2 or 3 different spots, where, you know, if it's maybe it's an anomaly, maybe it really is a problem throughout the entire trunk. And then I can also take a look at, based on the overall size of the tree, because this is going to show me the good wood on both sides, I can take a look at how many inches and look up the tree itself, the type of tree, and tell whether or not it's healthy or unhealthy.
And that, as you said, the center of the heartwood is usually dead, so that looks normal.
Yeah, so the center of the heartwood doesn't transfer nutrients, but what eventually what happens is it gets moist and it dies, or an insect maybe has gotten in there. Pine trees are notorious for that. Pine trees also a lot of times have like the difference if you go to a Lowe's or Home Depot and you see a pine board, you have red knots and black knots, and that's where the branches were coming out of that tree.
Yes.
And a red knot is still healthy wood from a branch, whereas a black knot, which sometimes they fall out and create a hole, is dead wood. So a lot of those types of things, and so that's why if you get a strange reading here, a lot of times I'll take a second from a different height or a different angle to get an idea of what the picture of the tree looks like. But it allows us to really take a look at a tree. If somebody calls me and is concerned that a tree along the side of the road is dangerous, this is a tool that I can use without blindly just cutting it down. I can go out and in 5 minutes have a really good idea of what that tree looks like without cutting it down.
Yeah,
so it's paid for itself. Yes, absolutely, paid for itself many times over. And it does happen a lot. Every tree has a risk of falling. It's just we assess the risk by where that tree is, what type of tree is, and obviously its health. But you know, a high-risk tree could be a tree over a playground that maybe doesn't look exactly right. I can go take a look at it and say, well, it doesn't look right, but it's still healthy. Whereas that same tree could be in the middle of the woods. Now it's a low-risk tree because if it does fall, there's nothing for it to fall on. So there's no risk to life or property. So A lot of decisions go into it, and sometimes it's just as easy. The old method. This is an old resistograph. So the old time tree wardens would take a rubber mallet and literally go around and bang the tree, and you can actually hear it. If there's rot on the inside, or if the consistency, the density of the wood isn't right, you can actually hear the difference with a rubber hammer just by gently tapping around the outside of it. So before we had all this technology, it was just a hammer. Any questions from anyone?
Where did you get the seedlings?
Those particular seedlings came from Oregon. So every year I'm part of the Massachusetts Tree Wardens Association, and we sold over 30,000, or got rid of, we were able to give out 30,000 seedlings this year throughout the state of Massachusetts. And so we put that order in early.
So you're the tree warden for the state?
No, the town of Norfolk.
For the town?
Yep.
Does every town have to have a tree warden?
Every town
Across the
is
US?
supposed to. In the state of Massachusetts, there's 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. There are 351 tree wardens. Yes.
And I'm just curious now, across the U.S., do most states have the tree warden law?
No, I think, in all honesty, I think Massachusetts is one of the first and probably one of the only that still does it. There are a lot of states that have some sort of law pertaining to that, but Massachusetts is unique in that area, and I think a lot of it stems back to the late 1800s. The law actually went through the legislature in 1899, and I'm not sure it's been changed since. So it's and it gives very unique authority to the tree warden. It's against the law for anyone to cut down a public tree in the state of Massachusetts without the tree warden's permission, and he is the only one that can give permission to do so. If that tree, if someone is insistent, then the tree warden will call a tree hearing with the planning board, and if one person, could be the tree warden, could be anybody, in writing protests that tree being cut down, then it goes to the mayor or the board of selectmen for them to have to vote on for that tree to come down. So public trees are very, very well protected in the state of Massachusetts, and so it's not just an ominous title to have. It's something that those of us that love trees certainly take to heart. It's a resource, and they're under attack at the moment with Dutch elm disease and a lot of the different tree diseases and issues that are out there. So we certainly take it to heart and do what we can. Hence, we're all here on the day after Arbor Day. So I appreciate you all coming out today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excited.
And if anybody has any questions at all, my business cards are here. Feel free to take one. Give me a buzz if anybody has any issues whatsoever. I'm always available and happy to help.